dive in. It's actually a show of hands. I know some of you, maybe many, maybe all of you, have at least heard of critical chain. You've heard of it as well, Rob? Great. So very curious, what's your background in it, or where have you stumbled across it?
Just recently, actually, Tom told me a little bit about
Just
it.
about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Senior Chief, do you go by Nana or?
Yes.
Okay. So Nana, what background do you have in critical chain? Just curious.
Well,
If any.
well, I actually did a master's in project management through Villanova University, and so that's kind of a bit.
Had they heard of it?
Say again?
Had they heard of it?
Well, they only talk about just a small portion of it through the.
But they mentioned it.
Right.
Woohoo!
So, and then when I came through, acquisitions, I was working over on Navarre, is when with the project management background and introduced me to it and wanted me to be a part of the team and things like that. So basically, that's where I'm at
Got it.
now.
All right, cool. And then for the Navarre folks, how is it being applied in your worlds, especially given that you're more maintenance, as I understand it, which normally isn't thought of as projects, is it?
That's it. It's projects, yeah.
Each
Cool.
individual,
Have you been brought up that way, or was that sort of a new revelation?
We were kind of brought up.
yeah, I mean, even before
So
we knew
maintenance
about
is a project. Awesome.
CCPM,
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
Awesome.
to us, it's a project. Each individual aircraft has a schedule, it has a time, and
And a unique set of problems to solve.
a unique set of problems.
Yeah.
A lot of uncertainties, right?
Interestingly, Mike, when I mentioned in my office what the kind of content of this class was, I have two former aircraft maintenance people that from some point in their career in the office that both wanted to come over and hear my brief explanation of what this class was about. And both of them right away started talking to one another about, oh wow, I could totally see how this would apply, and this and this. And they were just, I mean, they probably spent 15 minutes in, very passionate discussion about, wow, this would just be awesome in the worlds that we both came out of, so.
So was
It's
it if
interesting.
only?
It wasn't, if
Somebody-
only, it was a.
Some commander would.
Right, yeah, and I wish I'd known about this 10 years ago, 15 years
That's
ago
right.
when I was doing this stuff. That was kind of the reaction I got from them.
So that is what kindled my passion.
Yeah.
Is I felt like I had achieved success on most of my projects when I was in the line of fire over a decade or more, but it was mostly through pain and suffering, acts of heroism on the part of my team, long hours, weekends, doing some Jedi mind tricks on my clients. This isn't the scope you really wanted. It's the smaller thing over here. Quick story. I had a debate with a fellow practitioner, I guess about a year ago, about the importance of scope. And scope's the reason we do projects. Scope's the thing we're paying for. Cutting scope is, like, in my view, the worst thing you can do. That's not to say sometimes there isn't scope flexibility, of course, but in general, if you're cutting scope, you're cutting value.
It's like breaking a promise, huh?
Well, and even if you haven't hard promised it, like,
Yep.
okay, these are some nice to have features. If there's time at the end, please get to it. If you cut them out, that's less value you're
You're
delivering.
just taking value out of the whole thing.
Um, And so I said, and this colleague of mine was saying, yeah, but it doesn't matter. You just play the Jedi mind trick and just pay no attention to the scope over here. The scope over here is what you want. And I said, yeah, I don't agree with that. Let's take the Apollo program. Imagine, the scope was send man to the moon and bring him home safely. Imagine if we just went to the moon and orbited and came home, and that was it. We called it success. And I said that would have been a failure. He goes, no, it wouldn't have been. Because we would have said, isn't it cool we orbited man around the moon? Look, the Russians. And I kind of felt like, I guess I've done that a few times in my career.
Yeah.
So it kind of triggered there must be a better way. In fact, my whole career, I've been thinking there must be a better way. And my very first experience as a junior guy on NASA's space station program, within 3 months, I dug out an overrun. And I thought, well, that might not be that unusual. People around here talk about overruns all the time. That's what my job is to find these overruns early. And so I did some analysis and figured out that the overrun was 0.2. I didn't know what 0.2 meant yet. and I was pulling data from different systems. It was the early 90s, and I was still learning, you know, and trying to figure out what was going on. And when I finally ran the numbers and the analysis, it came out to $231 million. So it was 0.2 billion. And I was like, that can't be true. I must have goofed somewhere. Everyone's reporting green on their monthly status reports. But I said, boss, you know, this is my first run at this. You know, he had kind of patted me on the head and said, go off and analyze some stuff and let me know what you find. And I came back with this 0.2, and I said, I'm pretty sure it's 200 million plus. And he was like, well, that's interesting, you know.
Dust.
Yeah, just go on to your next task, and I'm sure there's a mistake here somewhere. We'll take it from here, thank you very much. And a week later, I found a front page article of Space News. Leaked memo from NASA indicates $231 million overrun. Oh boy. Anyway, so it's sort of, even back then, there must be a better way. Okay, so how about, other than the, I guess, you have some IT background. You IT, I presume?
That's correct.
And one of you had said IT,
I have a
right?
little bit, yeah.
Other than you got,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe everyone then. I won't exclude half the class. Who has applied Agile in a context other than IT? Maybe that's a better question. So what?
So I work at the office of the DCMO for OSD, and when we first were setting up the program there, we used Agile actually to design what we were delivering in terms of institutional reforms. So we had a Scrum Master on the team. We were doing, you know, development of looking at how we were going to get to this institutional reform target that was part of the DCMO strategic plan at the time. And it was a very different, for me, it was a very different approach to doing something like institutional reform.
What was the best pro in your mind and the worst con?
The best pro was probably the fostered collaboration amongst the team in terms of getting to those deliverables in a way that made sense over time. The worst con was trying to force a daily, with us doing, I mean, we're also hands-on practitioners, we're executing projects, it just
How long
was
did the daily
difficult.
meeting take?
Half an hour typically.
But that was still kind of dragged on? Too much? Overkill?
Well, and some of us just plain and simple couldn't commit to it. We were never successful at being able to have a daily stand-up because we've got a team of practitioners that are out doing projects. So it was basically whoever's in the office would show up for the daily stand-up. So in terms of communication, that was not helping us.
So we can talk about that today too, because some interesting advances in something as basic as a daily stand-up. Okay, and then I heard some of you talking about lean earlier as well. How about applying lean in a professional context?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to. Oh.
So I heard you too. Is that it?
I mean, we use lean also.
Okay. What aspects?
More for CPI type. And so if we have a process that is broke or something, like a strain or something like that, we will use lean and airspeed tools to kind of
So give me your
alleviate
best
that constraint.
example off the top of your head.
We have a lot. We've done so many events. Sometimes it's kind of.
So I want to
against-
start with, you know, something that's not just Mike Hanna's opinion or Baha Yozu's opinion, but you know, sort of prevailing industry studies that provide some evidence of things. And you might not be able to see all of the titles of these reports, but this is an annual report that the Project Management Institute puts out called The Pulse of the Profession, and they put different subtitles every year. Back in 2012 was Driving Success in Challenging Times, whatever. 2013 they changed the name to The High Cost of Low Performance. Isn't that mind-boggling? That one of the leading standard bearers of project management practice excellence says we suck. And then they said it again. And then they said, wait a sec, we should probably change the name. Right? This really got my attention because I'm very active in PMI. Once I learned that there are people in PMI who actually believe in the mission of advancing the profession, and not just, we've already figured out all the answers, just read our books.
Or it's not humanly possible to do any better, so why worry about it?
Yeah, right. It's
That's
like
the attitude I keep running into.
Yeah, it's like you can have, what is it? You can have quick, cheap, or good.
But you can't have
You
all
can't
three
have
at
all
once.
three.
Pick any two, right?
Right, pick any two.
Yeah.
Hate that thinking,
Me
right?
too.
So this study is pretty amazing. By the way, they're all free. If you're not PMI members, you can still get them. They're available to the general public. And I could geek out for an hour or two on this stuff to tell you what's all in these studies, but I'll spare you the detailed discussion and point out two metrics that they've grabbed along the way. First is this high performer metric, and they define high performer as any organization that says they achieve, they deliver projects within plan 80% of the time or better. Okay? Now, does anyone in this room feel like that's better, a lot better than regular, or kind of meh, or a lot worse than you'd expect? 80% sound like a reasonable?
I think it's reasonable.
Well,
Anyone think it's too high or too low? Like the bar is too high or too low?
For the government, sometimes that'd be considered
Too high.
pretty high, but you know, a lot of small businesses, 80% shutting the doors.
Yeah, I
Well,
agree.
for engineering, engineering projects, 80% is you're killing people. If we're
Right.
talking about,
We're
you know,
achieving 80%
delivering
within plan.
bridges and tunnels.
Probably on the backs of our people.
Yeah, that's probably the interesting question is,
It's the Qatar World Cup.
if you're getting 80% success on your projects, I want to know more about how you're doing it. And how much float is in there, and,
Sure.
you know, things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, in 2012, by the way, I know for a fact, because I've spoken to the study leads, that they captured it in 2012, but they didn't tell us for some reason. By the way, I should mention a little background. These studies are actually more like a survey. And they survey, the last couple of years, it's been 2,500 PM practitioners and stakeholders around the world in all project-centric domains. Now, I imagine most of those are North America or maybe Europe. I'm imagining, I don't know this, but I imagine PMI reaches out to 2,500 people or gets 2,500 responses because it sends it out to its email list or some subset of its email list. So, you know, there's probably some bias with these are PMI members. But also executive stakeholders, which is interesting. So it's not just guys like you and me looking in the mirror saying, oh, I'm pretty, you know, 80%. I'm sure I'm at least a B minus, right? So can you guess I want to see 2 or 3 guesses shouted out for what percentage of the organizations represented by these survey respondents self-assessed as a high performer?
Self-assessed.
And it said the definition is come in within plan, but I don't think anyone actually checked the logbook. You know, oh, we were 3 days late on that one. Ding. Yeah, they probably just thought, well, I was probably successful. I guess we're successful roughly X%. So guesses.
I guess 25%.
25%
Said that they were high performers.
Yeah, 25 of the respondents said their organizations achieve 80% or better within plan. Other guesses?
That really depends if you're comparing against original plan or plan version 19.
There you go again.
Again, I think PMI tries to be all tight with it and say within plan, but I think we're human beings responding, right? So we don't know the answer to that, but
Oh, scope change.
sure, right? 19 baseline changes, but we still succeeded. But whatever. What do you guys think?
So I would think that if it's amongst PMI members, they're probably going to compare themselves against the most current baseline, which of course you're going to at least make or come close to. I think it's going to be pretty high.
Like 70%? Okay. No?
I'll probably say maybe 30, 40.
30 or 40?
And that's what I was going to say, 30.
30 or 40?
Just in my experience, while the government may beat us up because we're not delivering software on time, and their bosses, they're doing a great job. So if they're doing the self-assessment, I would say that they would rate themselves as high performers, just kind of cover their own butts. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. So above 50?
Mm-hmm.
60?
Sure.
70?
Sure.
80?
Sure.
So,
I want to change my vote. Less than 25%.
Less than 20%.
Less than.
I'm not allowed to guess,
Because you checked already.
because I already know.
Isn't that amazing? Like, I'm looking in the mirror and saying, I'm ugly. I'm really ugly. So 2014,
That says something about integrity.
so I thought I kind of had the same reaction.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're actually being honest. Like, refreshingly honest. So similar 2014, and then they didn't tell us.
It's shameful.
So
And that's the attitude when you go to the PMI meetings, that this is the way it is. Projects fail. Every project since the pyramid has failed. And every project is gonna fail in one of the three key
I know,
areas.
well, what are you gonna do? We
And
might as well
it's,
joke
yeah,
about it.
it's even worse. It's,
Budget, time.
it's even worse than that. The attitude is, well, it's not humanly possible to do
Right.
anything different.
So
Because they don't know.
So I partially agree with that.
Well, I don't, but that's what,
So
that's
let me
what most
explain.
PMI
Let me
attendees
explain.
think.
According to what they've learned to date,
Yes,
they don't see how it could be humanly possible.
yes, that's absolutely right.
I'm sure if you ask people, like, if you had done it according to your original plan, they would think it'd be very high. But yeah, every project manager knows that, hey, I come up with my estimate, it's gonna be X, it hits corporate management,
Sure.
I get a 30% haircut, now I can't make it. So you know you're just kind of doomed from the start.
Yeah, and I guess in that case,
Right.
you can say, like, I choose not to respond, not applicable, because my original plan is no longer there, right? How can I commit within the plan that doesn't exist anymore? So the second thing I wanted to point you to, of the 20 or 30 fantastically interesting things in these studies, is project success. So, again, the definition of success is you deliver within plan. So then, of course, the question was, well, what percentage of the time do you, in your organization, deliver projects within plan? Any guesses there?
This is them talking about themselves.
In my organization, we deliver projects within plan X% of the time. You already saw it.
50?
50?
Yeah.
I need at least 2 more guesses.
I'll say it's less than 50.
For us?
Say,
For us?
yeah, for us, it's definitely low.
Even
10?
with
Depends on
critical
the,
10?
yeah, that's what the, I would say less than 10%, 5%.
5 or 10.
See, the thing that clouds this is that this, this thing about rebaselining 10 times.
Yeah.
And,
Of course.
and that was, they changed the scope on me, so I
Which
rebaselined and
we
that was
really
success.
shouldn't allow, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
But for us, most of the constraints is not on us.
Yeah, it's-
As a maintainers per se.
Right.
But it's on the external people supporting.
supportive.
So among
you
us-
say DLA, for instance, now you got parts sitting there, and then the estimated delivery time for this part is going to be maybe about 200 days from today. Meanwhile, the entire project sells for
Yeah,
200
right,
days.
right. You
Yeah.
can't include that uncertainty into your,
And things like
We
that.
include uncertain things in our planning estimates all the time.
Absolutely. There's nothing in there that has any certainty to it.
Then you have engineering,
right,
REIs and things like that. That takes a couple of,
depending on
months.
the platform, takes
Yeah, months to be able to just figure out what they need to get done.
But-
Then they get back to you and they give you a timeline, how long it's gonna take. So that throws everything out of the water.
But what's the conventional wisdom about how to handle that? Well, I'll create this complex simulation, and I'll do all these Monte Carlo simulations so that I can give you 85% certainty of how late I'm gonna be. What? What?
Yeah.
And we spend untold hours doing that kind of foolishness.
So before I show you the answers, it dawned on me a few months ago, think about whatever the rate is, it's bad, right? It's less than what it should be, maybe by a lot. And yet we still have people investing untold billions in projects, which means they must be good investment, even when our success rate is poor. Imagine what the ROI could be if the success rate wasn't poor. Oh man.
That would be
Right.
awesome.
Because again, like, can you imagine, say, an airline not having an online booking system? In today's day and age, I mean, I'm not talking about the 70s, Like, imagine just saying, well, that IT project's not worth it. Even if it's 10 times later than we all hope, they'll still do it. right? There's still value. So, of course, the value is another discussion, but there's, so better than almost all of you said. So then you start to wonder, in my mind, you start to wonder, well, wait, I thought they were being honest. Right? But whether this is honest or whatever you think about whether this is inflated or not, it is kind of odd that we have these kinds of numbers.
Wow.
Like almost like, how do these two even jive?
Yeah.
Right? Kind of. But again, 2,500 people are saying this. Right? So that means for anyone that's in there that's saying 20%, there's somebody that's saying like 3 people that are saying 99. Right? So no matter how you look at it though, even though we might argue that this bottom number's a little bit different than our own personal experience, it's still a D-. Would you agree?
Yeah.
There must be a better way, right?
Do you mind if I say something here?
Please.
I think those numbers on the bottom speak to the kind of human aspect of things, because when you go through something miserable, when you remember back, you tend to remember the more positive things. You don't always remember the misery. And I just think that, you know, while you may have evaluated yourself as not potentially a high performer, at the end of the day, you did achieve something. You delivered some piece of working software. It may not have been on time, or it may not have been everything, but to some degree, there was a level of success there. And I think that that 64% speaks to that human nature of wanting to say that you've accomplished something and you know, you actually delivered.
Then how do you explain the top number?
That's the funny about it. That's, you know, it's like, well, yeah, we did kind of suck, but you know what? We did deliver something. Right, we, you know, so.
If you're a pure statistician looking at this and trusting that the numbers are good numbers, you're basically just saying, man, it must be a pretty tight distribution focused right around the mean. And that the 80% plus is like on a tail off to the right.
I think that top number might have something tied to mythology. You know, yeah, I think I'm kind of a low performer. I know my partners are low performers. Those guys I know, this company, that company, they're probably low. But somewhere there has to be high performers. I've never met them, but I know they're out there.
But keep in mind, the question was in your organization,
Okay, that's
not what do you think it is in the industry.
Oh, I
It's
see.
like, what is it in your organization?
And if you had asked the customers the project success question instead of yourself,
I would
you'd have
love to
gotten a
see that.
very
Yeah,
different
I
answer.
see that number.
So among the many very fascinating things in these studies, they have not gotten there yet.
Yeah.
And I don't even know logistically quite how they might try, but
Yeah, as a victim of
Maybe we should
project
try.
management,
Right.
what success have you seen?
okay. So one more thing from this current year study. PMI, again, to its credit, is willing to sort of show the warts of the profession and, you know, not a pretty picture. But they can't help themselves by saying, well, we've been telling everyone to have things like these four. And if everyone would only listen to us and get PMP certified and have ongoing training and get their PDUs and all this stuff, it'll be better. Okay? So what they did is say, well, if you don't have ongoing training for PMs, we imagine you still succeed some of the time. How often? And then we'll compare it to the organizations that say they do and see what the difference is. So would we all agree that these four things are good things to have?
Well, they represent an attempt to have more control, the way you could summarize that.
Are they misguided attempts?
That would
Or
require
are
an
they inherently
opinion.
good?
That would require an opinion.
Yeah.
You know, there's been some studies about that. Do you get more bang for the buck when you do these four things?
So let's imagine that having these four things costs nothing. Play with me here. Okay? Costs zero to have ongoing training, even though it's not true. Would we have these four things? Is there inherent goodness in them?
Oh, you're guaranteed you're gonna have them, because when senior leadership doesn't know what else to do, they're gonna train, automate, reorganize, and add discipline.
Rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic.
Exactly. That's what we gravitate to when we
Sure.
don't know what else to do.
I would go, I have a slightly more optimistic take on it than you.
Uh-oh,
I
is
would
it?
argue that even if these things cost a lot, they're inherently good to do.
Yes.
That's my
Yes.
my opinion. Now, I'm sure if, depending, you know, you could jack the cost up so high that eventually they wouldn't be. but I don't think like training costs more than the value you get from it, depending on the training, of course. So here is,
Applied.
pardon?
Depending on how it's applied, right?
Of course.
Right.
You do a lot of training, but if we don't apply it.
Yeah, so now, some of you are sort of near my age, or maybe a little older. When I started my career, there was no PM training. There was no graduate certificate. Did you have a master's in PM offered in the beginning of your career? I had NASA training, which was cool, but that was tribal knowledge, even, right? There was no standard, I mean, PMI existed, but I'd never heard of them, right? And the membership was still kind of small. So I think just having training was like if somebody had told me, we're gonna ask you to be a PM, but we're not gonna train you in how to do it. Oh my God, you know, how could you do that to me? Okay, so here's the percentages. I'm not gonna make you guess on this one. When you don't have these things in place, here are the success rates. And again, they're kind of clustering toward that 64% mean. They're not all that far below. So I'm not showing you the red yet, the peaks of the red. You can see they're going to be higher. And if you assume a 50-50 organizations that don't have these things and organizations that do, you can kind of do the math in your head on how much above the mean we'll get. So again, I won't make you guess, I'll just show you. So again, when we have these things, like the best thing was this formal knowledge transfer process, that'll get us from the 64% mean to 70. Or the 57% when we don't have it to the 70 when we do. What do you guys think about that?
I'm wondering, do you know Mark Wopel, Pinnacle
Sure.
Strategies? He just, now I guess it's a year or two old, did a study, and we dug a little deeper on the success word for this. And he said, well, what does success mean? Well, it means benefit to the business, quality, scope, schedule,
So hang on.
and budget. Are you
According
going to
to
talk about
PMI,
those?
According to this study, we're
Yeah.
not asking you to assess the value. Even though that's the whole reason we do it. We invest money to get a return.
Yeah.
It just said within plan. Success equals within plan as best you can recall. And if you've documented it somewhere, go refer to your logbook.
Yeah.
I've never seen one of those of you. An actual track record book for 10 years on success rates. Who has that? But it's a topic near and dear to my heart, this whole value question. Okay? It's a little, I'm in the process of actually building a whole other training class just around that. Because when we get to things like throughput and reliability, we assume that we're going to have a more valuable portfolio of projects, and we will. But it kind of depends, even then, right? What if I'm doing twice as many projects as I used to, but the doubling, well, yeah, the extra doubling that I added to my portfolio was all low-value stuff. So again, a little bit outside the focus of today's class, but maybe on a break or something we can talk a little bit about it.
Well, what he would tell you is that doing those four things will help some areas, and it makes some areas worse. For example, schedule performance and budget performance have a negative correlation to those four.
Interesting.
Isn't that? I think it was a 2013 study. In other words, if I do more training, I get better business success and better quality,
Worse schedule here.
worse schedule performance and worse budget performance.
So I become
And-
better at doing the Jedi mind trick.
Well, it's because you've implemented more control and paid attention to all these controls and being obedient to those, and forgotten that, oh yeah, I made a promise about a budget and a schedule, and
Right.
so.
So we're going to get into that a little bit too. Having a lot of control at the detailed level doesn't necessarily mean we have good control at the high level, does it?
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes it even gets worse. Okay. So
But those are still good things to do. You got to do them to,
I'm with you.
yeah,
Yeah.
but maybe not for this.
If I didn't believe in the thing on the left, then I wouldn't be here, right? In this class.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get into Agile. So again, I imagine, since not everyone in here is an IT person, that there's enough of you here that have minimal exposure to Agile. Is that true? Is that
Yes.
fair?
Yes, because you keep saying IT as if it's interchangeable with Agile. Some of us grew up doing software before Agile even existed. And so, like, that's my background, is IT projects before we even knew how to spell Agile.
Right.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, if you're like me, we did find ways to do incremental delivery,
Yeah.
have transparency with customers,
Yeah.
do frequent, delivery, all that stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of things that fell under the Agile umbrella when the manifesto was written in 2001 had already been around.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna, we don't have time in the class to walk through a whole Agile module just to give you the basics of Agile. But I will tell you this, there are attributes in Agile of incrementalism. Let's do things frequently, turn something out that's working, whether it's software code or some other result, show a customer what we've done and get feedback. Okay? So that's one. The tight increments in the most prevalent Agile method, which is Scrum, is called a sprint. And it might be like every 2 weeks we're going to try and show something to the customer. The reason I think it lends itself well to IT, and why I grew up in IT first, is because imagine you're trying to do that when you build a building. We're going to build the first 2 floors, and then we're going to ask the customer what they think about it. We never bother getting specs, because that's a lot, that takes time and effort. We're just going to build 2 floors, show them to the customer. If the customer doesn't like it, we'll tear it down and build 2 more floors. That'd be sort of silly, right, in some domains. But there are things about Agile that can be applied to almost anywhere. And so even if the incrementalism and sort of let's just show you something and refine and elaborate requirements with your input as we go, there's also some key things that Suzanne pointed out earlier, which she saw as the biggest benefit, which was the team aspect. And that's where I start to get very interested, and I think it applies to pretty much any domain, where are there methods where we keep hearing in books everywhere that we should empower people, and the workers know best, they know better than the bosses, and all this stuff. But how often do we really see it? Empowerment might mean, I'm going to pay for a lunch and learn, I empower you to buy pizza. If you don't like pizza, you're empowered to buy.
Something other than pizza that doesn't cost more than.
Aren't I a great boss? But the real work doesn't always feel that way. So again, I think it's sufficient for the purposes of this class to understand what it really means to put a team in charge of things. And what does that look like? We're going to get into some specifics there. So with that very kind of cursory overview of some of the key features of Agile, how has Agile helped? Right? So at the project level, again, by the way, even though this is kind of a cool name, and it obviously caught hold, and now you see Agile everywhere, even in construction, they say, we're Agile. It's like, what does that mean? When do you tear down the 2 floors you just built? But the speed part is very interesting. So the only thing there are some terms in Agile that reflect speed, like sprints sound sort of speedy. And they talk about velocity more than they talk about task duration estimates, for example. But in my mind, the agility, it might be great, but the real benefit in my mind is speed. Is there something they're doing that actually boosts speed? And if so, I can probably use that elsewhere. Because with or without increments, with or without tearing down 2 floors of what I just built, if there's speed and it's big, I want to know what's going on there. So when you look at the individual studies, hardly anyone actually got this mean of 30. This is the Mike Hannon rough guesstimate of 30, by the way. It's just my own review of what I've read. Typically, it's 0% to minimal, or even negative, or like 80. So now I'm really interested. Who gets 80 and why, and who gets 0 and why? And I think I found out. We're going to get into that today. But either way, there's a speed smiley face here.
Yeah, we just had a PMI dinner presentation where a company, I won't name names, but in our local area down there in Norfolk, just kind of finished implementing Agile. And rough estimate, they probably spent $500 million doing it. I mean, big IT.
Doing what?
Switching from
Just training
traditional,
everyone?
yeah, new software, new training, and just the cost of rolling out a new way of doing work. I mean, there's no official number you can go find in the accounting department, but general estimates, $250 million to $500 million to make that kind of transition. And when he said that they got they had a 20% improvement in productivity. I about came out of my seat. Are you okay for the cost it took you to get there? And, well, it is a little low, but
I mean, if it's 20% of $10 billion, I think it's worth it.
if I was the CEO, I'm not sure I would be, but anyway.
But I'm with you.
Yeah, 20,
With you.
25,
The
30%.
gains you made, what's the,
But you know what?
what's the
Was
payback?
The cost
Was
is
it used-
astonishing,
Yeah.
almost no matter what scale. But that 20% is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we've been trying like heck for decades to move the needle, and we are stuck in the 64% thing, right? And all of a sudden we see 20, 30%, that's not insignificant. I think we do a whole lot better, and many teams have gotten that 80, which is really interesting. So reliability. There are some studies that show that in certain circumstances, the success rate, and that's kind of all I assign to that, however you define success, part of success, this success rate has gone up, but in other scenarios, it's even. And even when it goes up, it doesn't seem to go up a whole lot, and it's only in some circumstances. So I'd like to give, if I had to give it an edge, I'd give it I'd probably turn up the corners of his smiley face just a little bit. It's not, I can't really give it a frowny face. And again, I think I understand why, because I think this notion of risk aggregation is really important. But there are other risks introduced, which we can also get into. So that's just project level. Sounds like most of us here actually have some role at the portfolio level, or at least we care a lot, or our clients care a lot about the whole collection of projects. And so a couple of years ago, when I started seeing results myself of higher than this with Agile, but also sort of a hit or miss track record, if I'm being brutally honest, I started wondering, well, even when it works, you know, if I can do any kind of copy-paste across my portfolio and get 30% or whatever, boy, that's awesome. So there must be a way to do that at the portfolio level, and how's that worked out? And it turns out it's been actually a pretty big disaster. In fact, Steve, your story of the 20% gain is the best one I've heard ever at the portfolio level. And did they sustain it?
So far, they're
In a
pretty
couple
tickled
years.
with it because the only reason it's okay that they spent all that money and got that little tiny incremental improvement was that now they're able to outrun user demand for software changes.
Great.
And so they've had to actually slow down a little bit. So, you know.
Just to wait on the customer.
Well, which raises the question, have you got more resources than you really need? Because
Of course they do.
Yeah, of course they do.
Right.
Yeah, you've got an IT department that's probably way too
Well, if
big.
the customer's willing to pay for it.
Yeah. What a world.
So this is actually the biggest, in my mind, the most shocking disappointment. We have this hit or miss track record at the portfolio level, and it's because we kind of copy and paste it, but we're obviously not copying it. There's something wrong with the copying or the
It's
pasting.
not replicating quite the way we wanted it to, yeah.
Sometimes even with the same team members, which is also interesting. So that's kind of a sad face. And then just some examples. I just tried to get a few from different industries to give a sense of this. A lot of people were really intrigued by what John Deere did just because they're not really an IT company, but they depend a whole lot on IT. And again, they kind of got an initial smiley face, and then it's actually been pretty bloody there now. They ended up having to do a purge of anyone that said they didn't like Agile.
Wow.
Okay. This was even worse, and it's local here, so I have some friends that got caught up in it. If you're not familiar with Freddie Mac, they're a big federal home loan guarantor, right? They headquartered here in the DC area. Now in conservatorship and have been for a few years, so that's not good. But they were trying to get their way out of it with Agile. They had a few local Agile teams that had tried it on their own. It's sort of a grassroots thing that started to really work. And then the CIO basically said, okay, everyone's going to training, we're going to do Agile everywhere. If you don't like it, you know, put up or shut up. And it was such a horrible disaster that when I went there, a friend of mine brought me in to speak with some people and offer what I thought would be a better way forward. But just because I mentioned the word Agile, because there's some beneficial aspects to it, I got shown the door. It was such a dirty word by that time. Go to the door.
There's a lot of woundedness in the project management or the portfolio
It's
management.
ugly. And it's fed the flames of, fanned the flames of zealotry, right? When we have such successes in some places and such failures elsewhere.
We've got an IT organization down in the Norfolk area that does IT work for, and rolls out these big healthcare systems for like Medicare and Medicaid around the U.S. And the only reason they're succeeding is because they're just gobbling up they're just consuming project managers. People come in, they stay there for a few years, and then they're so burned out, they have to go somewhere else.
So, I know your company does a fair amount of VA work. Do you support any VA projects, or have you?
I do not.
Okay, have you heard from your peers anything what's going on over there?
No, not really.
Are you Army, or what's your?
So, I do software implementation in the intelligence community.
Okay, got it.
And what community?
The intelligence community?
Intelligence, okay.
So, a guy that was a client of mine when he was an Army major back 15 years or so ago, phenomenal guy, full of energy, your sort of stereotypical take that hill at all costs kind of Army guy. He retired and got a nice job at the VA in their IT world. He's now assistant deputy CIO for project management across the agency. And 2 years ago, right around now, he was chartered with a pilot of 36 projects. So it's a big pilot. VA spends $4 billion a year in IT, so 36 projects is still kind of small for them. And he told me a few months ago that he would proudly claim that they've achieved agile buzzword compliance.
Woo-hoo.
I have a guy, his heart is in the right place. He's poured so much energy into it, and he's kind of at a breaking point. So this is interesting, isn't it? I see no smiley faces at the portfolio level. In fact, a lot of issues. I've got a really important speed game that I want to look into, and maybe aspects of reliability that I might not mind carrying forward. So we'll revisit all that as we go. Okay. One more little thing. There's a couple studies out there. Now this is just small projects, but anybody heard of the chaos report? This is sort of an IT thing. This is the longest standing report on IT project success and failure. It goes back 20 odd years. And so you can see here, this is 03 to 12. It costs a lot of money and I'm too cheap to buy it. So they'll release it to the public domain after a few years. So the last one I had it's 2012. But it's still sort of a 10-year slice. And for small projects, basically the same picture, right? So that's interesting too. In fact, I have no hard evidence for this, but I suspect that when I have small teams and we can actually have good teamwork, I suspect there's something in it that makes that sort of similar.
And that success, that 49% success, boy, I'm skeptical of that. There's probably all kind of qualifiers with that
Of
about
course.
rebaseline, the change requirements on it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So quick comment on rebaselining. So let's see. So NASA example. So NASA was cooking along on the space station program, behind schedule, of course, and over budget, but still making good progress. And somebody stumbled upon some really interesting technical breakthroughs that could allow them to launch more weight into space and conduct more valuable experiments at less weight. Sound like a reason to change scope? Or should I just stick to the old plan and pretend the new better way doesn't exist?
That's a rebaseline for a good reason.
That's my point, is there are good reasons,
Yep.
right? Requirements change. I remember I supported the Army on anybody familiar with the Comanche helicopter program? Hasn't been around in over 10 years now. It was conceived in the 80s as a stealth helicopter to penetrate Soviet airspace. 10 years into the program, Soviet Union is no longer around. Is a stealth helicopter still useful? Sure. For that mission? Should we change scope? Maybe, right? Now I could argue it shouldn't have taken 10 years to get halfway through the program, but anyway. So one more thing on Agile, some studies. This guy, Scott Ambler, is a diehard Agilist. I've started calling them Agilistas.
Agilistas.
Which I feel a little bit bad about because there's a lot I do like about Agile. But anyway, he basically said, that chaos report is stupid. It defines success the same way PMI does, and that is within plan. Well, you can deliver projects without coming in within planning constraints and still deliver fantastic value. Still more than worthwhile doing. And whether we can debate the value question all day long or not, at the end of the day, let's ask the customer whether the customer thinks it was successful. So he doesn't say how many customers he asked, and I'm wondering how many. But let's assume it was a really good study and he found plenty of customers to talk to. And this is sort of a recent thing. So he said, well, really, the majority of the time, I might not be on schedule and I might still call it a success. I might not be on budget and still call it a success. And I might not even have everything to spec or within scope. But it can still be considered a success. So really, if you came in within all 3 planning constraints, it's only relevant 8% of the time. So let's set the bar there and see what the success rates show. And I don't know about you, there's still a lot of orange and red here, even with the lower bar. And you might even argue this is a good place to put the bar. So I'm not saying it's artificially easy. And his point here, of course, is traditional ad hoc methods compared to Agile, there's a meaningful change. But again, this is 50-ish% to 63. And then, of course, we have this challenged category, some of which can be considered successes, some not, depending how you define it. So, again, in my mind, I'll take the bump. And especially, we saw the studies that showed some speed benefit and occasionally some reliability benefits. But if you're like me, you're thinking, can we do better? Is there something that we can do better even than this? So questions on any of this Agile stuff before we move on?